lovely distinguished panel. Everyone from moderators, plant biologists, VCs, epigeneticists, and artists to talk with you today. There's a great set of questions. We'll have guided moderation for the first 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions afterwards. I want to tell you a little about where you are. This is Many Labs. Many Labs is a nonprofit that welcomes distinguished people in our community to come and develop curriculum for science and technology for both children and adults. If you're interested in learning more about this space, Peter is one of the organizers. He's sitting in the back. He also brought you beer, so you should say thank you to him later.
Thank you.
Thank you. This panel, my name is Mary Ward. I'm co-producing this great event. It's 2 panels that's ending in a bio art show. That's going to happen the 3rd week in January. What are we doing with these events? We're trying to reach out to the common public because there is difficulty talking about genetic engineering. And that difficulty is often due to terminology. And since we can't have a discussion because of the terminology, often it becomes very polar, very black and white. You're either for or against genetically modified organisms. But that kind of prevents us from having more of the important discussion about maybe when or where or who should be using this new technology. And so we're going to kind of discuss some of that tonight. The final show is an art show. It's full immersion. We invited artists to help us with this discussion. If you've worked in a lab before, you realize that genetic engineering is mixing small volumes of clear liquids with each other, and then you put them on a plate and you get spots or you don't. But what's happening there in that process is much more profound. Likewise, genetic engineering and in our society, it's not just whether you're going to buy genetically modified organisms at the grocery store. This technology can have profound effects on our society, and those things are also not clear. It's very murky. For instance, it's really cool for a lot of people to think, oh, we're going to fix childhood cancer. But giving a child blue eyes? Absolutely not. Why? What's the difference? We're just changing genes. And so some of that's really murky. So we're going to bring in artists to kind of explore and have a visual discussion for that event in January. It's called Genetically Altered. If you want more information about that, here it is from me, Mary Ward. All right, so I'm going to hand off this mic to our moderator, Alan. He runs a science comedy show called Eureka. In fact, if you can't get enough of this sort of stuff, that's great, because tomorrow night at 7:30 at Piano Fight here in the city, they're having another kind of fun science discussion, and it'll be about nuclear fusion.
Yes, nuclear physicists talking about nuclear.
It's going to be great. So if you enjoy this sort of discussion, it only gets better tomorrow night, 7:30 at Piano Fight. I'm going to hand the mic off. Oh, and panelists, hopefully you'll be able to remember your names and talk a little bit about who you are, but brief. All right, so thanks.
Thanks, Mary.
Oh.
Woo! All right. Thank you for setting this all up. This is going to be great. So I actually prepared a novel to describe myself. Okay, laconic, short wisdom. So my name's Alan. Kevin, who's sitting over there, right here, and I do co-produce the science comedy show. That's definitely our biggest passion right now. And these guys are all going to be blowing our minds about bioengineering.
My name is Mary, and I'm a co-founder of Counterculture Labs, and I'm here to represent biohacking.
Hi, my name is Antonio Lam. I'm the co-founder of an algal biotechnology company based in Ireland. It's called Biotics. We just recently finished the Bio EU program at the end of July, so I'm excited to tell you guys more about that.
Hi, my name is Sarah Davis. I'm a science artist, primarily focused on physics, physical things, and yeah.
I'm Greg Trenant. I'm an investigator at UCSF, California Pacific Medical Center. I study genetic epidemiology, so my field is focused on identifying the genes and mutations that affect human aging and human age-related diseases. I'm not changing anything, I'm finding mutations.
Hi, my name is Ryan Bethencourt. I am focused on accelerating biotechnology. I'm an investor, an entrepreneur, actually one of the, I guess, early founders of the biohacking movement alongside Mary. And my aim is really to, move this entire field forward. I personally got involved with funding about 57 biotech companies, mostly in San Francisco, IndieBio, but then also personally through both angel financing and actually building them myself. So.
I am Kevin Whittinghill, and I already feel dumb being up here. It's been 40 seconds. That's good. I have no science background. I'm a comedian. I do comedy here in the Bay Area. I might go to an open mic after this show down the street. I'm living the life. I'll sign autographs later, but I also produce a science comedy show with Alan. I love science. I love combining science and comedy, so I thought it'd be fun. He invited me here to probably say stupid things. So let's see if I can oblige.
Hi everyone, my name is Kara Havens. I'm kind of glad I went last because I am right in the middle of everyone. So I was trained as a traditional academic scientist, and then I decided to start a company, which actually IndieBio funded in the very first round of what they were doing. That company focused very much on aesthetics, in fact solely on aesthetics. Usually when you hear about biotechnology, you hear about someone who is looking to cure a disease or kind of change the world in a really huge, significant way. I was looking to make color-changing flowers as a new way to talk about this technology with a very broad audience. And so that brought me to connect with a lot of artists, actually. So as a very much outsider from all of these different perspectives, I've ended up thinking a lot about how we use technologies in a very broad sense well, and this technology in particular. So, let's see.
You started.
I'm going to start it. Good, I gave you the questions. We only have one mic to prevent over talking, so panelists, if you're eager to say something, just kind of like raise your hand and we'll make sure you get the mic. 2 seconds, we're pulling up the important questions.
Can everybody hear the varying voice volumes?
Yeah.
Yeah? Because we can turn it up. Nope.
Okay. All right, good.
Yes.
Turning it up a little bit might be okay.
Yeah.
And could I ask how many of you actually work in a lab or have like a science background, just to get an idea? Okay, cool.
We're avoiding science terminology,
Yeah.
but sometimes it just happens. All right, so everybody answered the first question correctly. Congratulations. It was, who are you? All right, so the next one that I think is pretty interesting, and it's definitely interesting for my scene, is there anything that should not be genetically engineered? All right, and so I think that the entire world can be genetically engineered. The world is our oyster. It's our new frontier, is biology. So I'm unleashed. What about you guys?
I have some reservations then.
Oh.
Because as awesome as what you're saying is, I think we do not completely understand what the future could be like if we do start genetic engineering and what the effects could be in specific realms. So does anybody have any thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I think it's important not to think, maybe shift the conversation to not what organisms can we engineer, but why are we engineering them? And maybe shift the dialogue that way, because, I mean, we should have a right to engineer anything, but our reasons and our ethical reasons for doing so should be well thought out, and that's my opinion of this.
Can you give an example of a situation where you should not?
You know, that's a tough one, but I would say probably, I mean, making biological weapons would be something obviously that we would probably not want to do. I mean, there's but the way that we mitigate some of these risks is that we allow we allow everybody access to these things, and that way the community will sort of police itself. And I think that's a solution to help mitigate the risk, because the more people that are looking at a question or a problem, I would think that it would make it easier for us to all come to a common conclusion and decide on a coherent course of action to protect ourselves and the environment and whatever other concerns that we have.
Any other panelists want to weigh in on something we should genetically engineer? So everybody down to engineer people?
I'll take it.
You do cats.
Go first. Let's go to you first.
Well, what if I, we went out and we had like coffee, and I took like a nap with some of your DNA. I took these fine fellows, and we were able to grow you. And the next time you met me, I had like a version of you, like a dog collar, like Folsom Street Fair. Something like, wouldn't that weird you out a little bit? Would you have, what, if I said, oh look, she's got blue eyes. Well, I made her slightly, wouldn't you, then I'm walking around with you, it's your version, and then you try to talk to you, but only you can say like blah blah, because I removed your vocal cords. So, and you're like, what's this guy doing? He's a freak. And then then I can say like, I don't even have to stalk you. I just made a version of you. And so like, if people want to stalk celebrities, they don't have. But then you have all these like, you have your like Jessica Alba's like in a dungeon somewhere, like 5 of them. That's not creepy.
Kira, take the mic.
I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm looking for funding right now.
Okay, I'm gonna just apologize to everybody right now, because I've been out in the desert for 6 months thinking philosophical thoughts to myself. So anytime we have a conversation like this, and it's been, I'm just glad that we jumped straight into dystopian future with people slaves, because that gets to the heart of the problems here, right? What you were talking about in your scenario is not a problem with technology, it's a problem with, I'm sorry to say it, you, right? It's what we make with the tools we have and the actual tools themselves, right? And I understand that you are just taking this straight to the point of absurdity.
Am I?
This is a question, right? But when we're talking about this, we need to be able to distinguish between the technology itself and the way people use it, right? For this particular technology, one of the interesting things is that there is not much difference between the way you make a clone of, say, a sheep or a pig or a person, or the way you clone a plant. It involves the same sort of machinery, it involves the same sort of pieces, and it's really easy to get this confused. So when you start talking about what shouldn't you engineer, that question actually has a whole lot of layers to it. It has the layer of, do we want to maintain a sort of wildness? Is that important to us, where we don't see the things we do impact the world, right? There's an element of, are we willing to take risks without knowing what those risks are? And we do that all the time with all sorts of different things. And often, even when we know the risks, if we can see some sort of financial benefit, we do it anyway, like mining, right? That is not good for the environment, but everybody likes cell phones and everybody likes having, skyscrapers, so we mine for things and we take metal out of the ground. There's, I think asking, what shouldn't we engineer, and just kind of expecting one answer from that is really difficult to do. It kind of simplifies the question too much, if that makes sense. So if we want to get more specific about that, maybe, do you have a...
So you're claiming you took the easy way out.
I mean, I can talk about this all day long. This is what I do, right? Maybe we can...
Okay, I'll quickly add, I don't think we should engineer boy bands. It takes some of the magic away.
Repeatable hits. I want to GMO everything, so.
Why?
Why?
Why everything? Why is nothing sacred to you, Ryan?
That's a good question, right? I'll counter it with like an interesting thought. So today we find that species are going extinct, right? There's currently a thought that I'm thinking around conservation, like 3.0. Species are going extinct, reefs are being destroyed, right? We have extinction everywhere. What if we could engineer these animals to be more resistant to extinction? What if we could bring back animals, like revive and restore, right? Like, I think we should engineer entire worlds, right? And it's like, so coral, right? Coral, if if you've ever scuba dived, you see the destruction that happens down there, and it's due to human impact, right? So could we use the technologies to fix that? Right, like this is what I'm fascinated by. There's actually a company called Coral Vita. We wanted to get them in Indie Bio, but they're already like doing their own thing. They're an amazing company. They are actually growing coral 50 times faster on land than you can grow in the ocean. So you could grow a reef back that would take 50 years, you can grow it back in 1 year.
And then you stick it in the ocean and it's like,
And you stick it in the ocean, and then it changes the environment, right? You essentially terraform the piece of the ocean.
great, but it goes back in the ocean and then it just chokes off again.
Sarah,
Not necessarily.
speak on
I'm
the mic.
just saying.
Speak on the mic.
Yeah.
That's actually really valid. Say that in the mic.
Okay, so you grow the coral and then it just chokes once it goes back in the ocean? Like what's like?
Not if you've engineered it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. For higher temperatures or higher levels of precipitation.
Oh boy.
Yeah. There we go. I think we have a
So
tape.
things are going extinct because we're destroying habitat,
Yes.
losing habitat.
Yes.
So genetic engineering is not going to fix a stream to bring back the salmon.
No, it won't.
Got to
fix
remove
the
the dams. Got to
Yeah, I agree with that.
hatcheries are a disaster. So, but that's not why I'm here.
Okay. All right.
But that caused that.
But the flip side is we destroy reefs, right? So
Yeah, but it's reefs are going away for other reasons that should be fixed.
yes.
That's
But you
But-
can argue the same with rhinos that are being extincted.
Do you have the microphone, Ryan?
Oh no.
all right. So I'm going to talk about people because I do this research in aging. So this is complicated, and what I'm worried about are the unintended consequences. So, for instance, it seems like a no-brainer to me that for the single mutation diseases, the Mendelian diseases, cystic fibrosis, something like that, you know the single mutation that causes that disease. I can see fixing that because you want to remove these very terrible, terrible diseases. But what's next? Okay, what's next? We've got another spectrum of familial diseases. Let's take familial Parkinson's. That's like 10% of all Parkinson's. There are mutations in specific genes that we know highly increase your risk of getting Parkinson's. You're not automatically going to get it, you're at risk for it. Should we fix those? I don't know. There are families who carry very high cholesterol levels and very low cholesterol levels. We know the genes that are mutated to cause those. Should we be engineering those into people to lower cholesterol levels? I don't know. Let's go more extreme. What if you want to make tall people? There's no tall gene, right? There are hundreds of genes that are involved in height. This is just, and that's not all of it. It's diet, it's environment and genes. So far, the largest genetic studies of height have identified over 700 polymorphisms, meaning ATGC changes, in over 400 genes that contribute to about 20% of height. So there's a whole 80% we don't understand yet. So you're telling me you're going to mutate 700 things, which we don't even know if those are actually causing the change in the gene function. You're going to change 700 things to have a small effect on height, right? And what comes along with height? People who are tall have increased risks of certain types of cancer. So do you mean that if you're going to mutate the genes that make your offspring taller, you're also going to want to burden them with potentially an increased risk of something else? Let's go to green eyes. You want to make a child with green eyes? Well, how about mutating those pigments, increasing their risk of getting different types of skin cancer? So these are all unintended consequences that we don't know what's going to happen when you change human biology.
Can I respond to that?
Sorry,
I think these are really great points. And I'm glad you brought up the levels of complexity, because I think part of what really confuses this conversation is the fact that we just say genetic modification, and then we just cover everything with that one term, right? What you're really talking about is a set of axes, if you can imagine an XYZ graph, right? Where you have, say, complexity, the 700 SNPs and 400 genes, and God only knows how many interconnections that we don't understand, right? On one end for height. And then at zero, you have cystic fibrosis, where you know exactly what is going on and you know exactly what you need to change. maybe on the y-axis you have, benefit. How important is this? How necessary is it to living a full and functional life? Height, almost nothing. Cystic fibrosis, very important, right? That's going to change your quality of life drastically. And then the other side of it is risk. Like, what are the problems that could be associated with this, right? And where these technologies, where these proposed changes end up on that matrix, I think really changes the conversation that you have. And at the extremes, there's a lot of agreement. It's in this gray area in the middle, where we don't have the language to talk about it, we don't have the framework to talk about it. We just kind of slide off of that into yes or no, like Mary was saying earlier. So I think really working on building that framework for discussion is an important next step there.
Really great discussion so far. Thank you everybody for contributing. I think we're going to kind of skip down a little bit. We're going to tie in a couple questions together. And basically kind of bringing it back to people, because we're all very familiar with people and so forth. And you can take it to other parts of where it's okay or where it's not okay. Antonio, you were talking about it's really, endpoint and context dependent when we're talking about ethics and the ethics of using biotechnology. And Kira, you're also talking about that y-axis, right? Where it's like, cost-benefit analysis of changing one gene. And thank you, Greg, for pointing that up, that, yeah, you can change one gene, and it can have all these other consequences. So I really am thankful right now that I'm not any taller, because I certainly don't want cancer. So the question is there any one trait that you could change about people? And is it okay to change things for aesthetic reasons only? So those kind of mixed together.
Well, actually for myself, one thing I would love is if we could change a gene that causes politicians to throw up whenever they lie. I would love that. So, realistically, it's not going to happen. But I consider all of this comes down to whether what kind of morality that you follow. So in a lot of ways, your own personal philosophy is going to inform your decision on whether you support genetic engineering or not. So in my case, I think that it's reasonable, it's pragmatic. I'm more of a consequentialist myself, so I think that if the end justifies the means, then we should do it. So for example, a lot of these diseases, if they can be cured with a simple base pair being changed back, then sure. But obviously, there just needs to be some framework for everybody to talk and come in and say or give their opinion and whatever concerns they have, like the way we're doing now. If anyone has concerns, then you can just come talk to us and see how we do things, and you'll see we're not like mad scientists just sitting in a crazy lab doing experiments on like humans and stuff. I'm a plant biologist. I genetically engineer algae, and we're all around. We're part of the community, so we're not like just separate from you guys. We are you. So yeah.
So you're talking about ethics. So here's a real life example. So there is a certain class of diseases that are inherited from the mother's mitochondrial DNA. So she's carrying a high mutation load in her mitochondrial DNA. Her children can inherit very devastating diseases, neurologic diseases where the children don't live a year. And so there's, just in the UK, they've approved and used this new technology where a mother carrying mutated mitochondrial DNA can use another mom's egg to have a 3-parent child, basically. So they take the mom's nucleus, put it in another healthy egg that's got healthy mitochondrial DNA, and then that's fertilized. So it's a mother's mitochondrial DNA, another mother's nuclear DNA, and of the father's DNA. And so this has not been approved in the US by the FDA, but it's already happened in the UK. So here's a technology, and so in order to not let this different mitonuclear combination get passed on to the next generation, it's recommended that only boys be allowed to be developed from this process. And so this gives this family a chance to have a child, But there you go. That's happened. This sounds like a good one for you.
Yeah. The baby omelet is what you described. That's what it is. Chives on there or something. Oh my God, just scramble that up. I like how you were saying now, just trust us, because you have a very unassuming personality. You're very nice. He's the guy who will kill you. You know, you've seen Dexter, super nice, but it's like you've genetically engineered yourself to have like a knife in your ear. But you're, yeah, I guess, yeah, combine, there's a lot of ethical questions, but I guess we just wing it, huh? Just figure it out. And then you were talking about the trait that we would want. Is that correct? Or not want?
To X out, to
Oh,
knock
X
out. You can do either. You can give
I'd like to ferment like beer in my belly. You know, and I just have like a gallon of water. I never leave the bathroom. You know? My back's really sore from bending over. That's too much to visualize. So, anyone else want to talk?
So you know that there's someone who actually has that, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's a guy that ferments beer in his belly. They
Really?
couldn't figure out why he was wasted all the time. Yep, microbiome.
Whoa.
Bacteria that fermented
Is he
food.
is he like a bartender? It's
No,
like,
they figured
like
it
what's
out.
on tap? It's a nice amber ale. Asparagus.
Koalas do that.
What
Koalas do that, yeah. They eat all that eucalyptus and it goes fermented. That's why they're kind of.
One thing to maybe remember, right, is like life will find a way. So things that you want may actually exist. The engineering of traits, I think maybe Greg, this will get back to what you were saying earlier. I think there's a tendency to imagine that we can engineer our way to a better humanity, right? Engineer a way to a better human. In my opinion, I think the only way we get to better humans is if that human decides to make itself a better human. I think this is a much different question from the kind of the standard like technology will save us sort of discussion, because the question of what it is that makes us human is going to get really, really complicated really, really soon, because there's a lot of other things out there that are approaching like personhood, but maybe they're not human. You know, we already have companies which are people, right? But they're not human, and we're gonna have AIs that are going to be probably real close to people, and they may even look a lot like humans depending on where robotics goes. But the humanity aspect of this, we can't just engineer it away or engineer it to make it better. Like this is a process that every person has to go through. So I probably wouldn't engineer out much other than the individual like disease traits for me. But I'm also in an interesting position because, like I said, my company was based purely on aesthetics. And I actually tend to fall into the categories that some of the other folks here have mentioned, where talking about engineering life, right, engineering the world, I think that we have the capability to do that, and it's up to us to decide what it is we want to do. And I am all about working with plants to focus on the traits that we love, to look at color and look at scent and look at form and kind of make them more beautiful and make ourselves a garden of the future. I think that's a great idea. Like, I went on a really long, like 2-year effort to try and make that happen. So I don't think we should throw out aesthetics entirely. And maybe there is a place in the future even for people where there's an actress that gets real popular and she has 2 different color eyes. And then like everybody names their kid Khaleesi these days, right? There's going to be a wave of babies born with heterochromia because that was cool. And that this is the sort of thing, I think, other than, this is the sort of like trend setting and trend following that maybe we need to think a little bit harder about, because this could possibly happen. People like to be in, they like to be beautiful, they like to be, popular, and physical appearance has a lot to do with that. So this is, I don't think you can discount aesthetics entirely, but I think there needs to be a lot of understanding about the complexity and the potential side effects of these things.
So Antonio said, trust us. And Antonio, you have a master's, PhD?
I have a bachelor's, so I graduated in 2015.
Cool. So he's got some science training, some classical science training, as do I, but there are a lot of biohackers that have no training. right? That don't have any ethics training, that don't know all about, you know, the computing powers that we have in researching genes and seeing how they influence each other. And biotech is unleashed. You can got the tools, you can order the DNA, and you can start doing stuff. So Kira's cool and down with doing anything and everything with plants. I know a biohacker that's engineering dogs to make them glow. Now, there's a lot of other things you can do. He's a breeder and so forth as well, and that's an aesthetic trade. And we've been doing that for a long time, and it's had a lot of negative effects due to inbreeding. So what I'm kind of asking the panel now is, should anybody be allowed to play with this technology?
Well, I'm sure that I share a common view with Ryan that I think so. Everybody should have a right to access this material. Scientific research should be democratized. It's the best way to keep everything sane and keep it open. Allow people to ask questions. Don't limit people's ability to inquire truth and other things like that. So that's where my stand is on it. I think the end justifies the means. So we should have people have access scientific information freely.
Yeah, I mean, ship has sailed. I kind of feel like it doesn't matter. Like, you can be against it, but capitalism and what, like, people are going to experiment. They're going to do whatever the hell they want to do, basically. I mean, prohibition laws just don't work, in case we haven't noticed that. So, like, I mean, I don't know. So given that that's going to happen, given that external forces will compel people to experiment for good and bad reasons, I mean, why should it, like you said, you know, why should the, you know, corporations have all the fun? Like, you might as well.
Yeah, you guys should have fun too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, plus the whole notion of truth and what's scientific and what isn't, even that shouldn't just be in the purview of institutions. Even that argument shouldn't be in the purview of institutions. So yeah, it's all in. It's a zoo.
Well, I don't trust us because we don't even know what it is that's underlying all these. I'm talking human traits, and we'll talk about any other traits too. We don't really know what's underlying, causing all of these different things that we could potentially change. We're putting billions of dollars into identifying which variants and which genes underlie height and eye color and all that stuff. We haven't figured that out yet. So you've got this hammer, and everything's a nail. And not everything should be a nail with this hammer. I feel so we don't even know what the nails are for human traits, frankly. And then I'll say, when it comes to why we shouldn't do this, we don't know what the future holds. And so genetic diversity is our evolutionary potential. So as environments change, the more diverse our populations are genetically, and this is why a lot of things go extinct, because there's no genetic diversity there, because we've overfished or whatever it is, they can't adapt. So genetic diversity is evolutionary potential for whatever unforeseen changes are going to happen. And if we start becoming monocultures.
No, I think actually that's a very interesting perspective. One I actually agree with a lot. I thought I'd bring in the ethical aspects on vegan, right? And so this is one thing that I struggle with, right? So I'm a scientist, but I'm a vegan. And so, you know, engineering animals, like sentient beings, like that's something that I really struggle with. Like the animal breeder, you know, the dog breeder friend that you described, like I struggle with that, right? Because I'm, you know, there's a part of me that's like, well, we shouldn't use other sentients, right? One day when AI emerges and looks at us and goes, oh great, there's meat for me to play with, right? And starts doing what we do to other animals, right? Like we're not gonna like that, right? So like, you know, I really struggle with that. So if we view that way, like what right do we have to inflict like harm and pain and suffering on other sentients? And so this is like something that I struggle with a lot. I think actually this is an important part of ethics, right? When we work with, but this will get done. Like people will engineer almost everything, right? People, I bet the first engineered human already exists, probably in China, right? Outside of the mitochondrial side, we know that China's doing a lot of stuff, and they have absolutely no hesitance to engineer traits like intelligence and various other things, right?
China is bad.
Well, actually, I don't think they're bad. They're just philosophically different, right? I mean, work on human embryos is banned everywhere except, China and a few other countries. Right? Like they don't recognize international law in the same way, and so they view things very differently. So what does that mean in a world where we're actually inferiors to the Chinese who've been engineered? We're smarter. Right?
But we don't even know what to change to make it smarter. So like, sorry.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Just to Greg's comment, I read a nice little blog, and it's like, we've been relying a lot on genomics, and we have all these great probability charts, but a lot of biologists will tell you, you don't know until you do it. You don't know until you knock out the gene. You don't know until you take that gene and you plop into another organism exactly the effect it's going to have. It's too complicated. We have to take it to the macro. So that's not data, and that's not looking at a bunch of things. And so thanks to the Chinese, we'll actually get some answers.
Yeah. Okay, you write that down. We're gonna have a Chinese, American genetic. If they have 12 fingers, then we need to have 12 fingers, right? It's like I can't. They're typing faster than I can. We gotta keep doing. I don't. And then your friend is just making glow-in-the-dark dogs. Is that not insane? I mean, is that supposed to be? If I was walking around at night and I saw a glow-in-the-dark dog running towards me, I don't care if it's a Shih Tzu. I'm like, holy fucking shit! It's Hound of the Baskervilles, the ghost dog. Well, we gotta run. Is this in your friend's basement? What is your friend doing?
It's all been done in Mississippi.
Okay, that explains it. Gotta find them in the trailer. We have science in Mississippi. I'm kidding. I love Mississippi. But we don't know what they will do. Unfortunately, but it's like a Jurassic Park type of situation. And you know what happened with Jurassic Park? Jurassic Park 2, Jurassic Park 3, it was a disaster. Sequels, Glow in the Dark 2, Glow in the Dark 3. It's not gonna work.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
That was necessary. A little bit of,
I think there's a whole lot to say on this question. So I'm gonna try and hit all these points that everyone brought up. Starting with the guy working on the dogs and glow in the dark. So this guy is a dog breeder. He's very cognizant of all of these problems with dog breeds, right? And he really wants to make a difference. This is something that I struggle with in the biohacker community, because instead of just making a difference, instead of focusing on, say, the single point mutation that gives Dalmatians a specific type of disease, and just going to someone who knows how to do this and actually introducing the trait and fixing this, he wants to do it himself. So there's a little bit of not actually being after the solution, but being after the process and the spreading and the democratization of it. Yeah, ego, being the one to do it. Yeah. And he has said, that this is it's not about him, it's about giving all the breeders the opportunity to do this. But I guarantee you, if you show up with a Dalmatian line that is not going to get sick anymore, you are going to be more of a hero than if you try and recreate the wheel from scratch. So if there's less of a sexy factor about being a biohacker and more of a focus on actual solution to problems, I think that would be a good thing to one point. I would really like it if you would stop saying that and justify the means. That is just not true. And I don't know how else to say that. There is, that's I guess just an opposite philosophical stance that I have, and I just hate the idea that biotechnology is being represented by that perspective. I just do not think that's right. I forgot what I was going to say about yours, but I'll come back to it. Maybe that was just the biggest point, because kind of my mind is blank now. What was the question again?
Who should be allowed?
Yeah, exactly.
To use this technology.
Yeah, so there's a lot of information out there, and the comparison between biotechnology and hacking, computer systems and stuff, that has been overdone, and that has been, it's a metaphor that has gotten pushed way too far in terms of understanding what biology is and how it works, right? It is really complicated, and computer programs are just not that complicated, no matter how complex they are. But there's a little bit of a parallel there, where you can say, all this information can be available, but in order to do something with it, you need to have the understanding, you need to know how to program, you need to have infrastructure available to you. There's a whole lot of knowledge that isn't there yet. And as someone who is a biologist, first and foremost, that's what my training is, we need so much more biology in synthetic biology, in biotechnology, to actually be effective at this, that I think this question is just kind of premature, because we don't have the information available to do the things that we would like to do. So I think we need a lot more basic research to kind of make this, and I guess I should say, that doesn't mean we don't know anything. Like Greg keeps mentioning, there are some very specific things that we know and that we can address, but in a lot of cases, we could use a lot more work. So I think you'll find the folks from academia don't think you should trust us as much as other folks might want you to.
Do you want to respond?
Took one of the dark dumb.
So I was actually kind of curious about that too. So I suppose, I mean, it is kind of a broad, very omniscient statement to say that your philosophy is the end justifies the means. So, but what is it specifically that bothers you about that?
Oh, sure. Because the ends do not justify the means. Yeah, no, they just don't. I mean, there are situations where you can achieve a solution many different ways, right? So let's imagine, I've worked with the cosmetics world in some instances, talked with people there. There is a growing pushback from consumers where people don't want chemicals in the things they put on their face and the things they ingest, the things that are in their skin. So if people don't want chemicals, right, one of the things that gets sacrificed is preservatives. So the fewer preservatives that are available, the more of a very few number of preservatives you'll be exposed to. Part of the reason we have, not part of the reason, but the preservatives used in cosmetics today are designed to not give you allergic reactions, right? And these are based on studies assuming how much of this particular preservative you will actually be exposed to over the course of your lifetime. Now, if the number of preservatives available gets smaller and smaller, you are going to be exposed to higher concentrations of those preservatives over the course of your lifetime, assuming that you have no new ones entering the pool, right? So it turns into a feedback where all of a sudden you only have 3 preservatives, everybody's allergic to them, and now nobody can sell cosmetics anymore. So the cosmetics industry is going to want a way that you can make a cosmetic that doesn't produce allergic reactions in the consumers, but also does not get them sick, right? Like this is a balance, that's the solution that they need. You can go about this by inventing a new preservative, by inventing a new packaging that doesn't require preservative, by inventing an entirely new formulation that doesn't need preservative. Like there's a number of ways you can get to the solution, and sometimes it's by avoiding the chemical process altogether and just changing the way the consumer accesses this product. So I think the thinking has to start with the solution that you need, and then the way you want to achieve that solution. Because you can do it really poorly, and that's usually the easiest and the cheapest way to go about doing it. Or you can do it in a way that is maybe longer, maybe more expensive, but also maybe just straight up better. Would you all like to hear a crazier comparison that has to do with organs?
Yes.
All right. Okay, organs. People die. There are not enough organs to go around. There are people that are dying because their organs are failing. There are a number of ways to get organs, right? We could kill people. Yes. Right? That's some people will like this.
Falling out knives.
Yeah. We could convince people to be better humans and institute behavioral practices where we have opt-outs instead of opt-ins on your driver's license and things like that. Those are boring. They are not sexy. They might be effective, but they're not attractive, and nobody wants to invest in them. We could grow organs in living creatures, kind of what you were talking about, right? We could either put human cells inside pigs, or we can modify pigs so that they look a lot more like human cells, so that we don't reject them. Both of these things are being done right now. The final alternative is that we could 3D print these organs, right? From your own stem cells. So option 1, from dead people. Option 2, from dead animals. Option 3, 3D printed. Which one is best? Raise your hand for option 1. From people, dead people. Option 2? Option 3? We know what the best answer is, right? We know what the most moral part of this, there is a consensus, I would say, in this room. So, what I think we
From
need,
5 hands?
well, there's only one for dead people.
I'll throw it in for dead people.
Dead people.
Never.
Yeah.
Organs.
All right, maybe not a consensus.
Cycling.
Maybe that was too strong. More people want this option where fewer things die, right? Is that a fair way to say it? So what I think there needs to be is like a body or a group that can sit down and have these sorts of very like dispassionate discussions about what is the best way forward to achieve a particular solution. Because those are all different means to the same end. So does that was long, but I think that maybe clarifies
Wait,
it.
self-promotion, fair enough.
Yeah.
That's what this is.
Shh, audience, you'll have your turn in a second. Yeah, back.
Turn fire.
One more question.
Yeah.
All right, so this is our last question, so we're gonna let our moderator speak.
Oh, wow.
This is good. This is very good. And we'll hopefully have more of these conversations and panels in the future. But I just wanted to say that you guys all know the term Anthropocene, just a period of time now that is being, we're most affecting humans, or most affecting evolution. As Ryan discussed about ocean acidification impacting coral reefs, and now we want to go and engineer coral reefs, one of the things that I just wanted to bring up was that as the humans affect the environment, we're changing evolution. So why not genetically engineer also and change evolution in that regard? We're already doing it with our waste and with our carbon emissions and all this other kind of stuff. But I'd like to just bring up a point of morality and ethics as we do it. It's just that you don't know how to make people taller, so you don't know what's going to happen. Even if you want to ameliorate a disease and eradicate it completely, you don't know what other impact that's going to have on maybe the neurology of the human being. So these are all thoughts to keep in mind. That I just wanted to, that was my 2 cents.
Wait, was that a question?
No, I wanted to get to the question though. Yeah. So obviously Eureka is a science comedy show, so you probably know what we do. We make fart jokes. Yeah, so we disseminate scientific knowledge to the public, and we do so with comedy and with pop culture and relatability, education, prizes, fun stuff. And this is a big growing concern. Actually, Greg, could you grab the mic and just explain a statistic about scientific research real quick, about how much research there is real quick, and then pass it back.
So the numbers I've heard is that biomedical knowledge doubling times. So in the 1950s, it was about 50 years that the amount of, say, data doubled. So if you became an MD in the 50s, you're pretty much set. You didn't really need to learn anything new. And around the year 2000, that became about 3.5 years. So the amount of information about biological data, biomedical data, in 2020, it's predicted to be about 73 days. So what this means is this is a lot of data, this is a lot of information, but that's not knowledge. We're not turning that into solutions. We're really good at making data. We're really good at generating information, but turning that information into a solution, the right treatment at the right time for the right person, or whatever the solution is, they can generate tons of data. We have to make solutions.
Yes, and so I wanted him to bring that up because this question that we want to ask is how can we disseminate, how can we continue spreading scientific information, knowledge to the community? And the point about how fast we're creating data now, we need better means to make it more relatable and educational to people's lives. So come to our science comedy show tomorrow.
So this question is about science communications. We're communicating about science right now. My solution is bring in artists, bring in play, making it visual, because actually all of us are visual learners.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, a good way is to just come in and actually work with us. And I mean, we're very open. There's biocuries, counterculture labs. Berkeley Biolabs. There's all these spaces that are available for people who are interested in the technology to come in and learn. And I mean, we're not that scary, so feel free to come hang out with us. You can even have a beer or something.
I don't even know how to answer most of these questions. I mean, it just doesn't seem like there really is an answer for all of them, actually. I mean, there's whatever we know about science and however we choose to implement it and engineer it, there's so much hubris involved, there's so many assumptions, and I don't know, like I have friends that are anti-vaxxers, can you believe it?
Whoa!
I mean, it's just like, but I don't disagree, I don't take either side. I mean, it's completely understandable, their perspective, and I don't have enough information to prove it one way or the other. Like, this kind of polarity between, it's this or it's that, or they're both wrong. I mean, it's like, I wish there was any mechanism that we can use to have a more nuanced discussion would be a good idea. But I just want to throw out, because I think it's really fascinating, some examples that you guys are probably aware of because you're all pretty sciencey, but maybe not some of the details of it. So you guys might remember ulcers. Helicobacter pylori was responsible for them. I don't know what that was, like 15 years ago, but it turns out that bacterium wasn't a new critter. It wasn't something that they just discovered out of nowhere. In fact, they knew about Helicobacter pylori as an infection in the lungs for about 50 years prior. But back then, the dogma in science was that these that things couldn't cross organs, things couldn't cross barriers. And they believed that because they didn't have any evidence to the contrary. And this tendency in science to say that something is not true because we lack evidence is a problem. And then you have on the other side where artists or whoever is considered not scientific, that's saying anything is possible. That's also, I mean, kind of a ridiculous extreme. So I think anything that we can do to have a more not just intelligent, but interesting conversation, like something that actually goes somewhere, would be good. And I don't really have specific, play, whatever, art, great. I mean, whatever, talking, sitting here, it's all good. But the current thing where we just lob shit back and forth on Facebook, and it's really retarded. Like, and even, some really incredible scientists that I really respect, some of the things that come out of their mouth about, and they try to kind of bully other people with them being non-scientific. It's just, it drives me insane. Okay, I'm gonna pass the mic, I'm shaking.
So I think one solution is more scientists getting out and doing things like this and having more forums for this sort of thing. But at least with my training and most of the people I work with, we're taught to be cautious. And the thing is, you have a hypothesis, you gather data, and your ideas change as technology changes, as you can collect more data, better data. And so we're used to that process. Science is a process. But that doesn't make an exciting tweet. It doesn't get you on the front pages or whatever, but that's how we make discoveries. It's incremental. It's a relay race, right? It's not a marathon necessarily. One discovery leads to another, and so on. So, there are cases where we know, like vaccines don't cause autism, but there are other things where we just don't know, right? Do blueberries make you live longer? I know somebody did a study and showed it, so I guess it must be true, but it's not. And that's the thing, is like there's so much one-off science that what you need to do is gather all the data that are available. The largest study ever on all the world's data on vitamin D in clinical trials and measuring vitamin D in large populations shows that there's no benefit to taking vitamin D except for child's birth weight and some tooth health. That's it. So all the stuff you hear about cancer, heart disease, blah, 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 there's no scientific evidence when you look at all the world's data combined. You can pick any one study you like to show that something's good or something's bad for you. You need to take all of the world's data and combine it into a large analysis to understand. And that's the process. And people are falling asleep because it's not very exciting, but that's the process.
I think there's just a fine line, right? I mean, when you talk about engineering traits, it's a fine line how we communicate things. So one person's insanity is another person's genius, right? And it's how we communicate. So I think it's a very difficult thing to do, but it's important that we have these types of conversations.
That's what I tell the ladies.
Right?
You know, one person's insanity, you know, no second date. But I do, you know, you mentioned 73 days. You know, that's very quick, you know. And I would like to think, oh, well, don't worry, you can learn all this amazing knowledge through Kevin's stand-up set. I'll slip it in with the online dating jokes. I don't think that's going to be good enough. You know, and especially if it keeps increasing to, what, 73 hours, 73. If I'm like having open heart surgery and I hear like the doctor saying, oh wait, I got a Snapchat, I just learned something new. You know, like, oh shit, then he's like saying, oh, where's the phone charger? I'm out. So we got to find a better way to disseminate that.
You have set me up wonderfully for that. So Watson, IBM's Watson, has been turned on to scientific information. And in particular, like the first time they did this, they just fed it all of the papers that they have on a protein called P53, which is a oncogene. It's a precursor for cancer, or it's an indicator for cancer, I guess, in some mutations. And not only did Watson actually corroborate 2 papers that were published like in the next 6 months or something like that, it identified an additional, I think, 6 proteins in the network around this particular protein, giving us a lead on what we investigate and what we hunt down next. So there are ways to integrate this information better. But I think this is a really key point, because part of the problem that the public has with science communication is that they hear these sound bites and they hear these conflicting things, and coffee will kill you one week and it will heal you the next week, and what are you supposed to do with all of this? And I think there needs to be a willingness to tell complete stories, like you were saying, like bringing all of this information together, and I think things like Watson will help with that. I also think it's really important to recognize, both for scientists and for non-scientists, that when we talk about things that get at the heart of the self and the heart of our relationship with the world, like DNA, like genetic engineering, we are not talking, even like vaccines, where there is like demonstrable 100% evidence that these do solve the problem that they were designed to solve, right? We are talking about identity. We're not talking about the actual science, right? When the mom talks about vaccines and autism, she's talking about concern for her kid. And that's where you start. When you talk about whether or not we should engineer something in the world, you're talking about what you think about man's role and relationship with nature. Does everybody know what HeLa cells are? Immortal cell line, use them for cancer research. Number of different things about this cell line, but if you read the book The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, right, it's a fantastic book, you should read it, there's a lot of good points in it. At one point, her descendants go to Johns Hopkins, where her cells were first taken, and they get to look at the cells, their mother's cells, under a microscope for the very first time. And there's a lot of very sharp juxtapositions here, right? You have a well-educated white man in a position of power, and you have some less educated black folks coming into the hospital in not in a position of power, having a conversation about something that is, quite frankly, complicated. And for the very first time, someone stepped out of their role as arbiter of knowledge and talked to them about their mother, and in a way that they could understand. And finally, these folks who heard all their lives that this monster inside the cells that had taken their mother from them, right? They had been worried that this was something that they could have. Forever they had worried about this, because nobody took the time to listen to their concerns. And, you know, the truth was they didn't, because this was from a strain of HPV that had infected their mother's cells, and it wasn't transmissible, it wasn't hereditable. But these questions about who we are and where the science takes us, we need to be able to switch out of, I think, as scientists, we need to be able to switch out of that role into like a person-to-person discussion, and really get to really respect where the fears and the concerns are coming from at a much more basic level than just correcting misinformation, because that, quite frankly, doesn't matter at all. Honestly, if you don't have that basal trust. No, go for it.
Okay, and then we're gonna end.
Well, the panel.
And then the Q&A, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the point I'm maybe I didn't fully bring up about that in particular, this one friend, actually, she just wrote this huge long thing, is not so much about, it's not so much about fear, well, of course it's about fear for a child, but I think really it's about experience with an uneven hand in information. And that's very real. Like we all see examples of that, politically driven, financially driven, and that's not really being addressed. I mean, it's not a lot of things about peer review. Like there's all kinds of ways that money and capitalism plays into information and the choices we make. So I don't think it's unreasonable to be an anti-vaxxer. And as far as anti-vax, the evidence goes for that not being related to vaccines, is it a lack of evidence or is it actual evidence? Like, I don't know. I don't hear a clear answer on that, but I haven't dared to ask a question because I'd fall asleep. I don't know.
I wanted to comment on one thing there.
I think
I just wanted to say one thing. So the Watson thing's a really interesting example in that, people now, sitting at home with a powerful computer can download massive amounts of biomedical data in the 53 thing, and they found it. That's great. For decades, big data analysis had led us to believe that hormone replacement therapy reduced risk of cardiovascular disease in women as they were older. So everybody was taking hormones as they were older. This is based on a fixed population-based data set called the Nurses' Health Study. Well, in the late 1990s, the results of a clinical trial, the Women's Health Initiative, came out showing exactly the opposite, that the women taking the hormones were actually at increased risk of cardiovascular events. And so these are two different, one's a big data type analysis where you find associations and there's probably all sorts of, underlying confounding going on. Whereas when you do the actual scientific experiment of a clinical trial, you find a different answer, which is the right answer. So the hazard is there's a lot of information and people can go grab it and find stuff, and that should never replace well thought out science.
I completely agree, and that's because it was corroborated, I think.
And so that really brings us why a lot of people don't trust science, is they hear a couple different things, but we're all trying to find a consensus. And now I'm going to hit down.
Well, and I would just like to give a friendly reminder to chill and eat a baguette every once in a while. Go and enjoy a sunrise or a sunset, and let a tree or mountain dwarf you, and don't always have to go crazy about science. Yeah, go listen to the birds chirp. So thank you very much to Many Labs and to Mary to organize this panel, to all the panels for coming out. For some Q&A, and if you guys want to ask a general question, we're going to keep it short. So that should have been a premise. Should have been 1 to 2 sentences for every person, because then we would have actually gone through everything. Now we know for next time. So let us know if you guys want to ask everybody. Does anyone have a question? Mary.
No, just raise your hand.
All right. Let's go ahead and start here, and then we'll go there.
I don't think, we heard a lot of objections to just widespread use of just whatever you want to do with genetic engineering, but my main concern would be something like further polarization of culture, right? So, for instance, already, wealthy people have better access to healthcare and things like that, and poor zones, and if you added genetic engineering into that, it would further, widen the gap between the haves and have-nots. And this is a concern for me. Is there a response or an answer among the panel that could assuage my fears in that topic?
Yeah, because $20 million is going to make me smarter, but it's not going to make the poor kids smarter. So, anyone have thoughts?
So one of our a way to make it so there's not that disparity of class and money for technology, we didn't democratize the technology, democratize the information, and that's what biohacking is about.
I guess eventually as things become less expensive to produce, they become available to more people. I'm not justifying it, I'm just saying like medications, same way, vaccines, whatever, cars, iPhones, remember the day when like, the really rich guy had the iPhone and now we're all walking around with computers. So eventually, maybe this will become the next iPhone. I hope not, but.
So this is just a quick thing. I saw my co-founder Ron Shigeta is in the audience.
Yeah,
right?
Ron!
So actually, we call it Shigeta's Law, right? So something that Ron found out when we were looking at commercialization of biotech was fermentation technology, right? So we looked at the long curve, and so the cost of sugar per pound, roughly, is about somewhere between 15 cents and 30 cents, right? So per pound of sugar, right? I.e., a certain amount of like carbon atoms can make X, right? And X can be anything. Turns out when you apply that to food, it's actually a really promising sign because you can start to feed the world's billions of people for less than $1 a day, right? So when you start doing the calculations, on the long arc, once you scale bioreactors to a large enough size, you can actually start to ferment, eggs, meats, all sorts of things in bioreactors. And so we think that the long arc of technology is towards a cost drop through biotechnology, through fermentation that exists today, right? The vitamins that we eat.
Are there any nutrients in food?
Oh yeah, full of nutrients.
Name some of the companies that are already.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of companies. So nutrients, as an example, nutrients, right? The vitamins that we take are fermented, right? This is where they come from, right? Like these are fermented foods. And in fact, if you look at fermented foods, some of the oldest, sourdough, right? And I'll start with sourdough. Roman armies used to march with sourdough, right? It was a very nutritious food, right? They took wheat and turned it into more nutritious food. So fermentation actually improves the quality of food in many cases.
But not all nutrients come from fermentation, right?
Not all, no. But you can make pretty much everything.
Yeah.
You don't.
It's just a,
Yeah, we can talk about it, but yes, so you can feed someone nutritious.
Ryan.
Grab the mic. Sorry.
No, Kevin, keep the mic.
No,
Keep the
Kevin,
mic.
go for it. Go
Am I
for
grabbing or am I keeping?
You're keeping it.
I
It's
think you need to
ethical
keep
questions
it.
here.
Yeah.
The ends justify the means.
Yes, there we go.
I'm taking
A
it
hail
from
to
you.
Ayn Rand.
Yes. We will destroy all the poor people who cannot. They are weak. We are strong. All right. I say maybe genetically, modify them so they, have like a Kanye West gene, so they think they're great no matter what.
So you just got handed another piece of information that you kind of expected to take on faith, right? At this point,
it's just like ecology, though. I mean, it has to matter somewhere in this. You can't engineer, you can't make things so efficient that you don't even need the planet anymore. Like, what? It just doesn't make sense.
That's not the question.
Well, I like that you brought up efficiency, though, right? There's a real tendency to kind of focus on the idea that efficiency is the highest virtue,
Right.
and that's a little bit of what gets tied into this idea that, you make one useful thing for one rich guy, and then eventually everybody will get that useful thing that was useful for that one rich guy. But like I said a little bit earlier, my perspective tends to focus very much more on solutions than it does, say, the technology that we use, or I guess it focuses on solutions with an emphasis on picking the right way to get there. And sometimes the solutions for folks that are in, poverty are going to be very different from the things that you make for rich people. And that's something you have to keep at the forefront of your mind. So I think a big part of this solution is actually bringing these questions into the lab in a much more tangible way, either through multidisciplinary collaborations with social scientists or artists or people who kind of think differently, and making, ideally, maybe you and I should talk about this, Ryan, but ideally making this sort of consideration a part of the framework for building a company right from the start, so that you don't end up with, another drug for high cholesterol when maybe what you really need is like a more complete food or something along those lines, where you actually take the problems into consideration and start.
All right, and then we'll keep the answers a little shorter, right?
So if anyone's getting caught in the minutiae of science and reading things on the internet, as you alluded to, and with everybody flinging rocks back and forth at each other via Facebook, there's a great book. It's called, and it just, it's Good Science, Bad Science. Great book. Fantastic. So the question though is, how many times do all of you start with the end in mind, and how many times does that change during your work?
Let's start on Kira's side.
Sure.
Short.
So I started making the color changing flowers, and that was a thing I wanted to do as a scientist because I thought that would be cool. And then there were all these objections out there. And so while I didn't change my end goal, because I thought it was a pretty reasonable end goal, I actually designed it to accommodate all these objections, because this was part of the goal, right? To lift the technology out of all this box that it already existed in and put it somewhere completely different. Where if someone says, oh, well, I don't like herbicides, oh, it doesn't have an herbicide-resistant gene. Oh, I'm afraid that it'll spread. Well, it doesn't have terminator genes, and it's not going to spread everywhere we've grown petunias for hundreds of years. So for me, I guess as a scientist, you always have to have a hypothesis, and you have to be willing for that hypothesis to be wrong. So in the case of my company, my hypothesis was that people would want color-changing flowers. Turns out they don't. Not that way.
I always start with the end, and then I don't do any of the work to get there. I'm not a scientist.
All right, I'll skip comments and keep us fast. Should we? Yeah. Rather, are we doing round robin comments?
Anyone else have an answer?
Oh,
Sure. I start with the study design because I want to find out how something leads to something else. And along the way, it's always much more complex than I thought it was going to be.
Ryan, I still think you should answer this.
okay. So
Just quickly.
okay.
Very quick, so yes. So usually when we look at building companies, right, the interface between innovation and science, right, and commercialization, product market fit is something that is very hard to predict before you start, right? So you may have a hypothesis, like you do in science, but the market is still, it's science, right? Like you don't really know, your mind can't fully predict what the market will actually want. And you see very surprising pivots. Sometimes they're small pivots, sometimes they're very large pivots. And so I think it makes sense to start with the end in mind. Often you start with fundamentals. Like Elon Musk does this all the time when he thinks about like how much will it cost to take a payload up. But the reality of it is you will pivot lots of different ways on that towards that end goal, right? It just happens all the time. Yeah. All the time.
Cool. Any other answers?
Yeah, I have a very good one.
I do too. No, I didn't mention it, but I'm a kinetic sculptor. So it's more in the realm of physics, and I suppose it's probably, my answer's probably boring therefore, but yeah, I mean, it's always, I have an idea of it's essentially engineering actually, because it's kinetic, and I'm always getting it wrong and having to refine it and realizing it's way harder than I thought.
Yeah, I was just going to say as well that, so just to add to what Ryan said, that sometimes as a scientist you're sort of considered like a gatekeeper or an arbiter of knowledge, but the thing is that our understanding, I mean, we have to also acknowledge that our understanding of things is very limited. So, for example, I'm very hesitant to make very broad statements about morality or anything because I don't have all of the answers, even though I'm in the pursuit of answers and I have some ideas of my own. And I have ideas, but I just don't have enough naivety to actually put forward something and say that this is the absolute truth, because tomorrow someone could make a big discovery and we all find out that what we thought was true today is just completely wrong. So it's just good to keep that in mind.
Yes. Okay.
But you did actually make a big statement.
Question everything.
All right. Yes. All right. Let's go.
I have a question. So effectively communicate with the general public, or do some more way to make people more aware of this, or
What is your answer?
For GMOs, clearly they're healthier. Pretty much everything that we have in our supermarket is not what it was thousands and thousands of years ago. It's more nutritious, it's more resilient. Bam.
Well, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of the food just fucking tastes like cardboard these days. Like, and I'm not saying that's GMO's fault, but it has a lot to do
Look
with
up corn. Look up what corn used to look like a few thousand years ago. I don't
well,
think
yeah,
you
it's
know
like
that.
bigger and whatever. But I mean, there's
It's
a lot.
like way different.
Teosinte is like it looks like
It looks like a strand of wheat.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it looks like
it's
wheat. Yeah.
But there's so
There's
many.
no kernels.
There's so many things that I think actually used to taste a lot better than they do now. I mean, maybe it's my old age that's kicking in myself. But I mean, No, I mean, I do think there is a real, and again, it's ecology, like soil depletion, like these things, it's more than just a GMO, not GMO argument, but actually I was, are you Chinese, is that your descent?
Oh yeah, I can explain more like Chinese.
We don't have time, talk afterwards.
Well, the reason why I was, I thought because Chinese is the tonal language, and one thing I was thinking is, in this conversation about science, not science, one thing that we're never able to really put into our language, in English anyway, is risk. Like we don't have percentages when we talk about things. And I was thinking it'd be really cool if we could have like, if you're 50% are kind of like so sure about something, in at least spoken English, not written English, but maybe you could find a way to put it in writing, where you could have like a level of tone depending on your level of confidence, about a scientific statement, since there's no absolute truth, you could be like, GMOs are okay? I don't know, something like that.
I think it's probably just like a marketing thing, I mean, the label says GMO, just spell it different, like G-mo food. You know what I'm saying? This tomato tastes like salmon, and it's done.
I like that tomato. It tastes like salmon. Sounds like a new business idea. Yeah, why not?
I think we should get it together. So my campaign for the flowers ran during April Fool's Day, and I actually put up an ad for GMO, the GMO detector, and the flower would turn pink and be GMO, the GMO, because it was a GMO.
There we go.
So
I'm available for hire.
Great, we'll talk later. But going back to your question, like, are GMOs good or bad, right? Like, again, there's a lot of layers to that question. There's one, are they healthy? There's one, is it good for the environment? There's one, is it good for, like, my belief system about capitalism and agriculture, right? So my answer, because I worked with plants and this came up all the time, was always GMOs that come onto the food market are fine to eat. They contribute to systems of agriculture that include monoculture and, other possibly things that you may have objected to, but they're fine to eat. And it's very much like the question of, is the water safe to drink? If you travel to a different country, well, maybe you should stick to bottled water, right? Like, that's the answer you give. You're not going to talk about, like, their sewer systems are not as good or whatever. You're just going to say, in this circumstance, yes, in this circumstance, no. And so I think it is all right for us to turn off, like, the intensely parsing brain, I guess, and just give a yes, I eat them type answer to that question. Or at least I think that inspires much more confidence than kind of the uncertainty that maybe we build into things as scientists usually. So.
All right, one last question.
Mine's real quick. It's yes or no.
It's yes or no. Really fast.
No. Next question.
If we could genetically modify everyone to just love each other and fuck each other into oblivion, but we would never do anything else to be the end of the human race, would we do it? What should we do?
I don't know if I'd want to have sex with everyone.
Genetically modify.
Yeah.
So is the question genetically modified love?
Sure. I mean, however you think.
Yeah. It's just.
No, because it's only through suffering that we have art.
Sure not.
I didn't understand the question, I'll pass it.
Oh yeah, it's going so fast. Quick, let me flip it on you. Would you modify yourself so you'd want to make love to everyone in the audience?
Genetically modified?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've already had all this.
All right.
We've already had all this.
So look around. There might be some.
I just think you just need like a hit of Molly or something.
I love it.
All right, since I was so short, yes, let's hear it.
So if we didn't have genetic engineering to worry about, we would already have various scientific ways of modifying food and modifying drugs. And we have regulatory regimes like the Food and Drug Administration that exert hopefully democratic control over those things. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm personally grateful for it, but I wonder how you feel about participating in under a government like that, whether you feel it's appropriate, comfortable.
I think a little bit of oversight can never hurt.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a delicate line as you work between public and private interests. So, what I think is good is to have a good relationship with people. Like at the FDA, for my product, we're making algal vaccines for fish and other aquatic organisms. I'm already having an early dialogue with these people so that they understand the technology. And I think that's what's important is the human relationships and having that early interaction with some of these regulatory agencies helps to give people a better idea of how things work. So I'm all for some type of regulation. Sometimes it's too overbearing, but I think it's good to have some. How much, I think we should all decide as a society.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I trust it in so much as we have a functioning government, period, like a functioning democracy, then it's good, but I don't depending on the way things go, maybe not. Like, I don't know.
I think regulation of this would be good. It's not going to stop any rogue actors from using it, but in as much as we can, we should.
So I'm actually a fan of reducing government regulation, especially the FDA. But I mean, it serves a role, right? The reason why the FDA existed, the historical role, is like snake oil, literally, right? People are selling snake oil, radioactive drinks, right? Like all sorts of weird stuff. So we need that. But now I think the pendulum has swung too much towards the safety versus risk-reward ratio. And so now we end up getting, cancer patients dying when there is a therapy, an experimental therapy that may kill them, right? But they don't have the opportunity to take that risk. They can't include themselves because we put so much of a barrier against that.
That's fair, but they're still not regulating the snake oil.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah,
you could still buy all sorts of weird crap out there.
You're right. Which is the disappointment, right? Like nootropics. I'm sure we all get hit up by various nootropics on Facebook and various other. What is that? Right? What does that work? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if the government doesn't allow us to create things to kill ourselves, it's no longer America.
I think regulation is a key component of what shapes this field, and it's going to continue to be for a really long time. One of the really important things to remember is that there's always going to be a lot of pushback when it comes to new regulation, right? There's always going to be this statement that, this will put us out of business, right? I think the question that we need to ask ourselves when we're considering the regulations that come forth is it okay that these folks go out of business? Is it all right to let this sort of selective pressure happen? Because maybe that is what needs to happen to pick the best path forward to our solution. So while regulation may indeed slow things down, or it may indeed, put certain people out of business, sometimes that's okay. And I also want to say that if a company doesn't want to go out of business, they're not going to go out of business. They will pick a different way to do business and continue to exist if the regulation forces them out of whatever they were doing before. So I would not be afraid of good regulation, right?
Cool. All right, guys. There were a lot of really great topics discussed tonight, and we're really happy that you guys came out to hear it out, and the panelists came out. Thank you. Everything from glow-in-the-dark dogs to maybe glow-in-the-dark Marys on. Kevin's really kind of you. From a cigarette butt. Just kind of crazy. Maybe there should be regulations on that. That's why you clones of yourself. But thank you very much again for everybody coming out. Anything else you want to say?
So the next panel discussion is going to be on the east side at the Omni Commons, November 7th. So mark your calendars. It's going to be about the fantasies, all the promises that biotech has to offer. It's going to solve everything. Everything. And I'd like to thank everybody in this panel for coming. I appreciate it, and all of my audience and the great questions. A quick shout out. Can you stand up, please?
Yes.
Alan is modeling a really fine shirt there. It's a really great color, especially for the fall. If you would like to purchase one of these t-shirts, please do, because it will help feed somebody who's not able to feed themselves. On that note, you can all be free to socialize. We're closing the doors at 9. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Denmark.
What are you targeting?
They have,